Hello, I'm John Davis, talking about my hypothesis. In the last talk, we talked about how, by adding 3 extra dimensions to space-time, we arrive at the fundamental basis of everything, as I believe, zero. There is nothing. That is the ultimate. And I call this state of nothing the pleroma. But before I go further to discuss how we get a universe from nothing, I'd have to point out something about the third level. And this is the fact that we have the space-time given, the perceived space-time, as a function of the 3 terms, the real space-time, the unreal space-time, and the imaginary. Because of the magic of I, the square root of -1, we would get the same result if we replaced the IS with the -IS term. It would make no difference. We would still get the perceived space-time as plus or minus the real space-time. Okay, so how do we get our universe from the pleroma, from nothing? And to do this, I have to, it looks complicated, but I've drawn space-time out here with the real terms, plus or minus space-time, and the imaginary, the plus term. We can equally get it, as I've just explained, by having the minus imaginary term here. The pleroma is the 2 real terms and the 2 imaginary terms, and this equals nothing. Now, our suggestion is that either one of the imaginary terms, let's just say the minus I term, one of the imaginary terms, actually, in some sort of quantum event, transforms, leaving us here with space-time, plus all the energy, matter, and radiation that populates this space-time. Remember, all 4 still add up to the pleroma, 0. But now, because it's nature does not like 0. It always tries and makes a balance, plus or minus, wherever it goes. So here we have one of the universe now based on one of the imaginary terms transforming. The second imaginary term transforms also, leaving us with the different space-time and all the energy, matter, and radiation that populates it. Let me try and demonstrate it using my little golf balls. Here we have the blue balls representing the real terms, real, unreal, and the pink balls, the imaginary and the negative imaginary terms. With all 4 together, we have the pleroma, which is absolutely nothing. No remainders, no residues, absolutely 0. Due to a quantum event, nature splits these up. Oops, come on out. Let's just take one of the imaginary terms out, imaginary balls out. That now becomes space-time, and this converts into all the matter, radiation, and energy that populates the space. Simultaneously, the other one transforms, the remainder is just the same as the alternative space-time. Remember, there's plus or minus, and now this one populates this. So in other words, what we've got here is a dual universe. Why should we be surprised about that? For after all, in the first words of the Bible, say that God created the heavens and the earth. It couldn't be clearer. He is describing, the writer of the Genesis is writing that the earth, the heavens and earth are created a dualistic universe. Now I'd just like to say a few things about the biblical story of the creation, because it tells us some important things. apart from telling us that the universe is dualistic, it also goes on to describe how the first light came, let there be light, the most famous, I think, saying in the biblical account of the creation, which I think describes the very first sun. Out of the darkness, all the atoms eventually came together under gravity. Eventually one mass became so heavy that gravity caused it to convert into the fusion of hydrogen atoms into helium, and we had the very first star formed, which would have been a startling revelation, because in other words, dark spacescape, this would have been the very first light. And it may very well have been describing our own sun. There are various other aspects of the creation story. I mean, the story of the earth forming initially. I'm not sure about there being a deep on the earth first, but there's certainly lots of water vapour trapped below the earth's crust. And as it cooled, volcanic action, and it caused water vapour to escape into the atmosphere. Comets and asteroids brought more water. So eventually, over millions of years, there would have been a lot of water in the moisture, kept there by the heat of the planet Earth. Eventually the Earth cooled, but it's been millions and millions of years, and eventually the first water vapour could condense and become rain, which further cooled the Earth, which brought down more condensation and more. And I reckon that this is how all the oceans formed. With the flood story, of course, we have 40 days and 40 nights, but we know from Psalm 90 that this translates, the temporal translation of one God day equals 1,000 human years. It could be 40,000 years of rain to actually cause our oceans to form. Now, the business of life and the creation of life, well, the Bible seems to suggest that the plant life came first, but in actual fact we do know that stromatolites, which are cryobacteria creatures, probably came first. But nonetheless, we can see here that there is some sort of scientific idea about how the Earth actually formed. There is, I would just want to say one thing though, that because it's inaccurate and because it doesn't quite fit the science, it strikes me that the biblical narrative is more in keeping not with it being inspired by God or told by God or in God's words. It strikes me that it could be what the ancient nomadic tribes were told perhaps 10,000 years ago, at a time when they had no writing, but all these stories were passed down in an oral tradition. And so I think this is more in keeping with what we find. Also, though, there is something that strikes me about the biblical account, and which has a bearing on how science has looked, or cosmologists have looked at the creation of the earth. If the Bible stories are in some part true, there doesn't strike me as being any mention whatsoever of some enormous, great big explosion as the universe came into being. And yet, since the early last century, scientists have always believed in the Big Bang Theory, that there was an enormous cataclysmic explosion. And yet in the biblical account, there is none. And I think this is rather striking. Okay, that ends this lecture.